Greetings, magical mavens. It's Afura here, the Writing Witch, and welcome to the next installment of our new Cyclical Living series for the 2024 into 2025 astrological year, the Astrology of the Wheel of the Year. If you're new around here on this channel, in past years we've focused on witchy seasonal living in a sort of slow living perspective, where instead of just focusing on the sabbats themselves on the Wheel of the Year and trying to cram all of our magical practices into just that one day or that one weekend or even that one week, instead we look at the Wheel of the Year as a calendar of 8 seasons that are about 6 weeks long, and that totally liberates us from the idea that we have to rush to experience the magic of the season. But this year, to take it even a step deeper, we are zooming in even closer on the cyclical cycle of the year. And instead of splitting the year into 8 sections, we are splitting the year up into 12 sections, the zodiac seasons. Did you know that the concept of the Wheel of the Year also encompasses zodiac astrology? By living in tune with the energies of the seasons, including the zodiac seasons, we're able to empower ourselves in a multitude of ways. If you missed it, I did a video recently to preface this series. In that video, I go into detail on exactly how astrology works and how it syncs up with the 8 sabbats on the calendar of the witches. I highly recommend you go back and watch that one too. But in the meantime, here's a quick rundown of the premise of our new series. In this new Cyclical Living series, we'll be focusing on the basics of astrology, the 12 signs of the zodiac, and how they fit into the greater story of the seasons and sabbats. Each sign corresponds to a 12th of the Wheel of the Year, and by looking at each zodiac season as a subsection of the 8 sabbats of the witches, we're able to see a fuller picture of the energies of the seasons and our place within them. So if you're used to watching this channel, you know that one of our favorite things to do in this community, instead of looking at the Wheel of the Year as individual days on the calendar that we have to cram our celebrations and magical traditions into, we look at the whole year as being broken up into 8 seasons, with each of the 4 seasons having an early and a late part of it. So, for example, the spring equinox marks the beginning of spring, and Beltane marks the beginning of the end of spring, and so on. So what we're going to be doing in this series is essentially just breaking up that concept of seasons into 12 parts instead of the usual 8 parts that we like to work with. The zodiac seasons are also ruled over by elements. There are 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and 12 signs. So that means that each element rolls over 3 signs. And since there are 2 masculine elements, fire and air, and 2 feminine elements, water and earth, this also means that the signs alternate between masculine and feminine each month, creating a natural state of balance that we can tap into as we learn to more easily give and receive in life. Other than being grouped by element, what makes each sign different is their modality or quality. They progress in a predictable chronological pattern. The first is cardinal, the second is fixed, and the third is mutable. The cardinal sign of each element indicates the start of a new season. The fixed sign of each element is consistent and sustaining, the height and epitome of a season, and the mutable sign of each element is changeable, transitioning into the next season. The seasons also fit perfectly into the Sabbat seasons of the Wheel of the Year, like I said, and each cardinal sign is the start of one of the 4 main overall seasons of the year. These are the solstices and the equinoxes. The fixed signs take place during the height of each season, which are represented by the Celtic fire festivals such as Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, and Samhain. The mutable signs rule over the final phase of each season before the next solstice or equinox. Each sign's themes and symbols align with the themes of the Sabbat seasons they fall into, and plays a key role in the story of the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that all things in the universe, including us, are constantly evolving through. So where in our pagan Wheel of the Year, we split each main season into 2 parts, beginning and end, with the astrological Wheel of the Year, we're working with the same solstices and equinoxes as our structure, but we're splitting the sections between them into 3 parts instead of just 2. So the very beginning of the spring season is the cardinal sign, which is Aries. The middle or height of the spring season is the fixed sign, which is Taurus, and then the end of spring is the mutable sign, and that is Gemini. Essentially, with the zodiac wheel of the year, it's not a separate system from the pagan wheel of the year, it's just a more zoomed in, detailed version of it. So for us seasonal witches, what's really fun and mind-blowing about the seasonal living approach to astrology is that it allows us to very easily learn astrology through our understanding that each zodiac season is just a subsection of the pagan wheel of the year that we're already living in tune with. By focusing on the themes of not just each of the overall Sabbat seasons, but also leaning in to embody its deeper and more detailed archetypes, I've been able to see dramatic growth in my life and a sense of balance and rest that keeps me feeling more stable, supported, fulfilled, and connected to nature. For the past few years, I've learned how astrology directly relates to the seasons and started living the astrology instead of just listening to astrologers talk about it. And now I'm passing along this powerful magic to you in this new year-and-a-day journey into what I like to call the zodiacal subsections of the pagan wheel of the year. And now, without further ado, let's get into our seasonal living for Taurus season. Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac, and it's associated with the pagan Sabbat known as Beltane or May's Eve. From a seasonal living perspective, the sun moves into the sign of Taurus at the halfway point between the spring equinox and the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, and Beltane or May's Eve, celebrated in the northern hemisphere around May 1st, falls smack dab in the middle of Taurus season. Taurus energy is related to the divine feminine earth element, and its main theme is stability. It also deals with themes of comfort, pleasure, practicality, and material wealth. The archetype of Taurus is the goddess aspect of our journey, and this time of year invites us to get grounded in 3D reality by prioritizing stability and creature comforts. This period between about April 19th and about May 20th is a great time to plan our leveling up journey in a way that's steady and sustainable, even if it means establishing a slow and steady path of progress. The alchemical element of Taurus is earth, the element of groundedness, stability, nourishment, and the physical body. Taurus's quality or modality is fixed, the modality related to the most seemingly consistent part of a season, in this case the height and epitome of the spring season. With Taurus being the center point and epitome of spring, and Beltane being both the center point of Taurus season and the center point between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, Beltane is essentially a holiday celebrating the very essence of springtime. Back in March, we had Ostara, the start of the zodiac year, the start of the spring, and also the start of Aries season. It was a time represented by the concept of fertility and its aspect of potency or potential. It was about leaning into the possibility of future abundance and taking the initiative to plant seeds. Whereas Beltane is more so associated with the actual pregnancy or birth of the new year potential. The seeds that were planted are now hopefully sprouted and beginning to grow into healthy seedlings. The wildlife and livestock are either pregnant or giving birth, as opposed to just conceiving. And in our seasonal living phase, we've already begun taking action on our goals and desires for the year and are beginning to see progress. The symbol for Taurus is the cow/bull, an animal that is very heavy and grounded to the earth, and one that humans have relied on for stability, sustenance, and dependability. And once humans began the practice of animal husbandry with these types of creatures, it led us to being less nomadic and more consistently tied to areas of land. The glyph for Taurus looks kind of like the horns of a bull. The ruling planet of Taurus is Venus, the luminary associated with one of the most iconic archetypes in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon. Named Aphrodite by the Greeks and Venus by the Romans, she was the quintessentially feminine goddess of fertility, love, beauty, value, and the tangible pleasures of life. She was a lover, a mother, and someone who was aware of their own value. The key phrase for Taurus is I have, and Taurus represents being abundantly grounded in all those things that allow us to feel stable, supported, nourished, comfortable, and sustained in life. Just like every sabbat has its opposite on the wheel of the year, so too does every sign of the zodiac. We're empowered to achieve balance each season by being mindful of the spectrum between the two. Just as the opposite of Beltane is Samhain, the opposite of Taurus is Scorpio, the fixed sign that represents the height of the fall season 6 months later. So what we notice about these opposites is that they aren't true opposites, but just opposite sides of the same spectrum of themes. Taurus/Beltane deals with themes of growth, beauty, and springing forth from the earth, whereas Scorpio/Samhain deals with themes of death, decay, and retreating back into the earth. With Scorpio being ruled by Mars in classical astrology and Pluto in modern astrology, both in a way represent the death god counterpart to Venus or Persephone, another goddess associated with spring and rebirth. We can even think of it as a more masculine expression of the themes of this particular spectrum. Regardless of our gender identities, we all have this range of themes and expressions within us. The universal themes of the Taurus/Scorpio axis are the balance of life and death. And while this masculine-feminine balance occurs in every season, this particular axis represents that balance even more so than the others. Beltane and Samhain in particular deal with these themes of the goddess and the god shifting in their power as they do their cyclical dance. So in my practice, I utilize this time of year as a time to reflect on the law of gender and how masculine and feminine energy are balanced in my life, and if there's anywhere where I need to shift them around to feel more of a sense of balance in this phase of my life. And while we're on this subject of spectrums, I think it's also important to address the hemispheres as they apply to the Wheel of the Year and the Zodiac Wheel. As we all know, the traditional Wheel of the Year, which modern pagans have borrowed from the Wicca religion, is oriented to the Northern Hemisphere, and based on my experience communing with witches from all around the world online, it is most common for pagans in the Southern Hemisphere to reverse the Wheel of the Year appropriately to fit their seasons. And what's really magical about this concept of reversal is that it too reminds us not of the imperfection of the Wheel of the Year system, but actually of the perfect balance of the universe. You see, even though the Southern Hemisphere is celebrating Samhain, when my neck of the woods is celebrating Beltane, that doesn't render it contradictory that it's Taurus season regardless of where you live. It actually makes it make sense. Just as mid-spring represents the prime of seed planting season, autumn represents the prime of harvest season. Both times of year when many ancient pagan cultures celebrated the seeds and abundance. In the spring, we plant the seeds, and in the fall, we save new seeds to plant the following spring. I don't know about you, but fall for me is just as much a season of potency and taking action on my goals as spring is, just in a slightly different way. So the idea that Taurus season in April and May is someone else's harvest season makes sense to me. In our lives, as in nature, it's always important to maintain a sense of balance, and the Wheel of the Year demonstrates for us that balance comes in many forms. There's a time and place for everything. It isn't always about a perfect state of neutral moderation. Taurus season is an example of a time when the scales are tipped towards feminine, receptive energy, and a time for indulgence in 3D reality. But at the same time, the balance is there in the form of the little dot of yang within the yin side of the yin-yang symbol, so to speak. This is often exhibited in our witchy traditions as we celebrate the Wheel of the Year. In my practice as a domestic witch and a green witch, the middle of spring is a time of tending to my seedlings and starting my garden, but it also entails the concept of decay. It's this time of year that I'm assessing how last year's compost decomposed into fertile soil for this year's crop. In years when I've just moved or I'm starting a garden in a new area of land, this season can also involve things like killing grass and weeds, whether I'm creating a till or no-till garden bed. Those themes of death and decay are still present, just in a different form. For no matter what the season, we can't have one side of the coin without the other. And interestingly enough, the actual astrology of the zodiac season supports this concept of balance. For every Taurus season contains within it a full moon in the opposite sign of Scorpio. You see, when the sun is in any sign, the full moon has to take place in the opposite sign, because the full moon is a type of transit known as an opposition, meaning that the sun and moon are on opposite sides of the solar system, which is why we're able to see the reflection of the sun's light illuminating the entire face of the moon. This year, the full moon in Scorpio is on April 23rd, about a week before Beltane. These are just the kinds of things that get me really excited in my witchy practice to nerd out over the wonders of the universe. By celebrating the solar sabbat and embracing its opposite by celebrating the full moon, we're able to accept the universe's gift of perfect balance. When we approach our cyclical living in this way, we're all embracing the same spectrum of themes, whether we're in the northern or southern hemisphere, just in different ways. This idea of keeping up with astrology and moon signs used to really confuse and overwhelm me, until I learned to look at it from this cyclical living perspective. Now I've designed journal prompt pages and pre-scheduled posts in the Writing Witch Coven to remind us of when the moon phases are, what signs they're in, and what questions to ask ourselves each week to naturally embrace their energies in practical, empowering ways. And as if that wasn't all mind-blowing enough, there's even more. There's also a way to tune into the balancing of all four elements within this cyclical living approach to astrology. Remember earlier when I said that the sun cycles through the 12 signs, leading it to also cycle through each of the four elements 3 times a year? Well, the moon actually does the exact same thing, only on a monthly basis instead of yearly. During each moon cycle, the moon spends a couple of days in each of the 12 signs. And when we take note of the 4 main phases in the lunar cycle, the new moon, the first quarter moon, the full moon, and the last quarter, we get a perfect dose of all 4 elements. Surrounding this Taurus season, we have that full moon in Scorpio, the fixed sign of the feminine water element, the opposite of the sign the sun is in. Then the last quarter waning moon in the sign of Aquarius, the fixed sign of the masculine air element. Then there's the new moon in Taurus, the fixed sign of the feminine earth element. This is that obligatory conjunction between the sun and moon that results in the predictable new moon that happens in the same sign as the sun every zodiac season. And finally, there's the first quarter waxing moon in Leo, the fixed sign of the masculine fire element. Notice that I've pointed out how all 4 of these main moon phases are taking place in fixed signs, which reinforce the overarching theme of Taurus season being a time of epitome. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to be both exerting energy effectively and being open to receive the benefits of doing so. From there, we'll shift out of this chapter of fixed energy and into a new pattern relating to the mutable signs of the zodiac in time for Gemini season in late April. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I really wasn't consistent with lunar astrology until fairly recently, because in our busy lives, this practice of paying attention to not just the moon phase, but also its sign can seem really overwhelming or easy to lose track of unless you have an understanding of how it works, as well as a system in place to keep up with it. But after committing to practicing it for a while, I saw how magical, inspiring, and beneficial it could be in my cyclical living practice. And that's why I front-loaded the work of researching the dates of the phases and signs and created prompts and notifications that not only remind us of when they are, but also provide a super simple template for learning the patterns and embodying the themes. I've done all of the work for you and for myself in advance so that we can enjoy the flow of it going forward. So if this aspect of cyclical living inspires you, but you don't want it to take up too much of your time and energy each week, then the Writing Witch Coven is for you. It's also for you if you're feeling really inspired by this mind-blowing information in this video. This series is going to be packed with powerful information that you're going to want to remember, and since I want you to be able to retain and implement it in empowering ways, you don't have to worry about writing all this down. Members of the Build Your Own Grimoire tier in the Writing Witch Coven on Patreon are receiving a grimoire chapter for their binder this month that's essentially a written version of everything we went over in this video. But regardless of which tier you decide to join, all Coven members will get support to stay consistent in our cyclical witchy lifestyle by tuning into a few journal prompts per week that keep us in tune with the Sabbat seasons, zodiac wheel, and moon signs, all of which work together to guide our well-balanced practice. Each member receives my beautifully designed grimoire prompt pages, as well as notifications when it's an important astrological phase or seasonal checkpoint, so you never feel like you're falling out of tune with the cycles of nature. Depending on which tier you decide to join, you'll get access to lunar astrology prompts only, or upgrade to join us for our yearly seasonal living challenge, where we journal and set intentions on the themes of the 8 sabbats in the 6 weeks surrounding each checkpoint on the Wheel of the Year. Or upgrade to the top tier, which gets all of the above, plus a handmade Book of Shadows binder and a whole new set of themed information and prompt pages each month, which in 2024 will include a beautiful transcript of each zodiac video, as well as lots of other witchy subjects. Okay, so now that we're done nerding out over the what and the why of Taurus season and where it fits into the Wheel of the Year, let's shift into embodiment by delving into the how to embrace this season. Here are 4 powerful themes of Taurus season using the 4 elements as a guide. How you go about embodying these themes will differ depending on what your goals and practice are like, but for real-world examples, I'll be sharing how I'm embracing these themes as I take up my dream of homesteading. You can plan to focus on one theme per week in alignment with the elements of the 4 main moon phases we discussed above, or you can simply go about them in whatever way feels most inspiring to you throughout the season. Water. Nature-charged bath spell. Beltane is traditionally known as a time for bathing rituals. It's said that in ancient times, maidens would bathe themselves in the morning dew or in a natural body of water at dawn on this day. It's believed that the act of bathing in nature during Beltane symbolizes purification, renewal, beautification, and the welcoming of the fertile energies of the season. This ancient tradition connects practitioners with the elements and the cycles of nature, fostering a sense of rejuvenation and spiritual connection. While stripping nude and rolling around in the grass or skinny dipping first thing in the morning isn't practical, accessible, or safe for most of us, we can all take inspiration from this practice by working with water from nature in some aspect of our self-care routine. Most years for me, this looks like waiting for a rainstorm as near as possible to the 1st of May and collecting the rainwater. I can use this magical water by charging it with intention and pouring it in with my bath. If possible, sometimes I've even gathered enough rainwater to keep an extra jar of it handy for any time in the year when I want to evoke the energy of purification, renewal, or beautification into a spell. It's also just a good bottle of water to have on your altar if, like me, you like to have a representation of each of the elements on your altar year-round. You could perhaps collect the water during this season, bottle it up, and then maybe pour it back onto the earth, and then refill it again the following May's Eve season. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can also collect from a natural body of water instead of waiting for rain. And if you're feeling particularly adventurous, you may even choose this time of year to try something like wild swimming. Personally, when I'm using the water in my bath, I would prefer not to use water gathered from my local lake because unfortunately it's contaminated water and swimming is discouraged. Also, to be honest, when I was younger, I went swimming in a stream only to discover that there were tiny worms in the water that ended up sticking to my wet skin. So I'm a little traumatized to put anything more than my legs in natural bodies of water. And when I really do feel called to do it, it's usually closer to the next Sabbat, the summer solstice, once the warm weather is well and truly here. But if you've done the research and you know a safe place in nature to bathe or gather water, by all means get as witchy with it as you want. To take this idea a step further, you could even use your gathered water to make beauty products charged with intention for renewal, beauty, and prosperity. For example, I love to use herbal infusions as a hair rinse, so I could use the Beltane water to brew sage and rosemary tea to both promote healthy hair and imbue myself with positive intentions. Earth, offerings to nature, and environmentalism. I feel like I can't mention my contaminated local lake without also saying that Taurus season is as great a time as any to do something to heal our relationship with Mother Earth. At this time, when we're emerging from hibernation, it's a natural time to start thinking even more about how we can live more eco-friendly lifestyles this year. And it just so happens that Earth Day falls right into this season too. I know sometimes when we think of environmental activism, it can feel quite overwhelming. It can seem like the problems are so big that they're beyond anything we can individually do to help. But the truth is, if everything we do is done with the intention of healing our planet, tiny, small actions repeated over time are what will make the greatest difference. While Beltane is one of the most enchanting, whimsical festivals on the pagan wheel of the year, it's also a season of practicality when we look at it from the standpoint of Taurus season. The sign of Taurus deals with a spectrum of themes from pleasure and indulgence to getting serious about what's needed for long-term health and sustainability. So if we're going to indulge in the pleasures of the earth this season, the least we can do is also give something back. On a practical level, this is a great time to learn about ways to live a more green lifestyle and to take the next steps in practicing things like composting, refusing plastic packaging, reducing food waste, etc. In addition to establishing a lifestyle that's more hands-on with sustainable practices, there's also the more magical and whimsical side of this. Taurus season is also a perfect time to give various types of offerings to Mother Earth, the spirits of nature and or the spirits of the land you're on, whatever each of those terms means to you. For some, this looks like leaving an offering of milk or honey for the Fae. For others, it's a more practical offering of seed to birds and squirrels. It could also include things like cleaning up trash on your walks, or donating to an environmental cause in a god or goddess's name, if that's something you're into. It all depends on what your abilities are and how you view the natural world on your own personal path. Air, wind catcher craft. Now, I don't know if this has roots in ancient tradition or not, but neo-pagans and modern witches seem to love things like wind chimes, ribbons, and colorful flags this time of year. It seems to stem from the idea of the maypole, perhaps, but upon doing some research on it, it's likely that the maypole as we know it today might be neither ancient nor of pagan origin. It appears to be one of those Christian traditions that may be loosely inspired by something pagan from the past, but we can't quite prove it. We can, however, use it for inspiration. Regardless of how pagan it is, people from all walks of life seem to agree that the spring season is a jolly time to decorate with colorful dangly things that blow in the wind. And in fact, that's one of the things I love most about this Beltane tradition. It's easy to incorporate it into your practice even if you're in the broom closet, or if you're fully out of the broom closet with people in your life, but you don't necessarily like to attract attention from neighbors or strangers, for example. If you're into green witchcraft, it's likely that you'll want to keep some form of an altar or talisman outdoors as a representation of your spiritual connection with nature. Something that gets to be out and freely interacting with the elements in their raw form. But if you don't have a private yard, you may not feel comfortable hanging a colorful pentacle wind chime out front like I did on Beltane the first time I celebrated it many years ago. But you can use a similar idea and create a wind talisman to bless, protect, and celebrate your home and or garden. I'm currently rereading Bud, Blossom, and Leaf by Dorothy Morrison, and I recently remembered that when I first started reading it last spring, I had meant to make a mental note to look up what a windsock was. She includes a windsock spell for springtime, and while I would definitely tweak it, I loved the idea of it. I just needed to familiarize myself with what the heck a windsock actually was. Turns out it's very similar to something I've made before. Early in my practice, when I made mine into a wildlife feeder instead of a windsock. A windsock is essentially a cylindrical piece of material, typically with ribbons hanging from it when it's in the context of garden decor. Or in some cases, it's a wooden or metal hoop with ribbons tied to it. The purpose in many cases is now simply as a decorative wind catcher or, again, as a spell, but apparently there's a more practical origin to this tool. It's to help you track which direction the wind is blowing and how hard. So we can combine this idea of crafting a magical garden talisman with the concept of a windsock to create something beautiful, magical, and useful. If you don't want to include any openly pagan symbolism on the windsock, you can instead work with mainstream symbols and colors, which can be just as powerful. Choose to add Easter eggs to evoke prosperity, abundance, or fertility. Use coins for wealth, or washers and bolts for strength and stability. Choose ribbon colors based on color magic, like blue for peace and green for health and well-being. As the wind blows, it activates and spreads the energy of your spell, and apparently, knowing which direction the wind is blowing can help you plan your garden too. Fire, jumping the flame. One of the traditions of Beltane is the jumping of the bonfire. It's believed that this practice stems from the traditions of the ancient Celts, who supposedly would build two massive bonfires on Beltane and pass people and livestock between them to cleanse and purify them physically and energetically. We can take inspiration from this concept of the cleansing fire to craft a more modern fire ritual. This ritual symbolizes letting go of the old and embracing the new, releasing negative energies, and welcoming positive transformations. Just as the Celts used the fire to purify themselves, we can use fire in our modern rituals to cleanse our minds, bodies, and spirits, allowing us to start fresh and invite new energies into our lives. One simple way to do this is with a burn ceremony. I know, I seem to recommend this practice for just about every sabbat and esbat, and probably just on any random day. My moon is in Aries, what can I say? I'm a bit of a pyro. But with Beltane being inspired by one of the Celtic fire festivals, it's a perfect time to embrace the flames. Depending on your living situation, this can look like anything from holding a candle and releasing any stagnant or unwanted thoughts or energy into it to be burned away and transformed, to dancing around an actual fire and throwing things into it, and anything in between. If you're an airy witch like me, you may wish to write down what you're releasing and burn the paper. If you're more of an earthy or fiery witch, you can play music and dance it out to release the old energy. Essentially, do what you feel called to do to cleanse and purify your spirit, to release the old and step into the new, using fire as a focal point. One ritual I did early in my practice was inspired directly by the idea of jumping the fire, but was able to be done indoors. I created a temporary altar on the floor with candles at the center. On Beltane, before midnight, I sat on the floor on one side of the candle altar and journaled about how my goals from the last May had panned out. And then at midnight, I stepped over the thresholds of candles and onto the other side, where I then journaled about how I was choosing to show up as my next level self, a symbolic portal into a new life. If you wanted, and could do so safely, you could also do this outdoors over a small campfire. So how are you feeling inspired to embrace these Taurus themes in your life this season? I would love to know. I am always looking for new ideas and inspiration. I would love to know. I'm always looking for new ideas and inspiration. So let us know in the comments. And also make sure that you join us in the Writing Witch Coven. We would love to have you. Everybody gets magical journal prompt pages and reminders on important astrological dates so that you never have to feel like you're falling behind or that you're not being consistent in your witchy cyclical living practice. And for more ideas on how to celebrate Beltane, I invite you to check out this video right here.